resources. For this lesson, exam objectives, pretty straightforward. You want to be familiar with the different report customization options. And we have a good list of questions to ask when you're creating and customizing a report. You'll need to understand how our sharing model impacts reports, what that means, as well as options for creating and modifying dashboards, that visual aspect. And then you'll also need to know the basics of when to create custom report types and what they can do for us, custom report types. So again, not necessarily all the ins and outs, but really a good use case for when you would create them and what people can do with them. Keywords for reports. We've got quite a few of them, reports and dashboards. First one, which was our last bullet point on the last page, is creating a custom report type. Now, many of you have probably created custom reports. That's what you do in the front end of the tool when you click on the Reports tab and you create a new report. That's a custom report. A custom report type, on the other hand, is built in Setup. So we'll talk about some reasons you might create this, but this is something built in Setup. Then you have your report formats. Report formats, the way in which your data is displayed. Is it just a simple list? Are there groupings? Are there groupings by rows and by columns? That is the report's format. We'll talk about report filters. You can use the default filters. You can add your own filters. You can edit the filter logic to really control the records that appear on your report. Then you have report charts, that visual aspect for your data, ways to visualize your data. We'll talk about exporting reports, which I know we touched on in the last lesson as a way to back up your data. We'll talk about subscribing to reports, which schedules to have it emailed to you, an emailed version, and you can have it emailed to others as well if you have the right permissions. And then we'll talk a little bit about building dashboards and setting the running user. So setting the running user of a dashboard always applies, but you'll also set a running user of a report in the context of a report subscription. Before we get to these questions to ask, those are important, but I want to go forward to this slide because I think it's important to define reports first, then we can know what questions to ask. And I want to provide some clarification to what this says here. So this says sample reports are built in. You can get different packages of reports and dashboards from the App Exchange, and most of these are going to be customizable. So most of these are going to be things you can overwrite because most of them are part of an unmanaged package from the App Exchange. What you do have in Classic, only in Classic, is standard reports. And these standard reports can be used as templates. So I could find one in Classic, I could save a copy, and then customize in Lightning. The standard reports are what cannot be overwritten or deleted. Custom reports, ones that you create, can be created from a standard report, or what I most often do is just create it from scratch. And because they're custom, you probably guessed it, you can do pretty much anything you want with them, including further customize or delete. Now we'll talk a little bit more about security when it comes to running users, but let's talk about report folders. Now this applies to dashboards as well. Reports and dashboards live in folders. And not only do they live in folders, these folders are actually used to control access to the reports and dashboards themselves. So let's go look at one of my report folders in my org. I'll go to all folders and we'll just look at my adoption reports and my sharing. So I have reports that live in this adoption reports folder, and it's already shared with an internal group, all public users. But let's say Allison Wheeler needs additional access. So this is how I give her access to reports in this folder. She can have the lowest level of access, which is view, meaning she can run reports in this folder. She could save as to save her own copy, but that's it. If I give her edit access, she can actually overwrite, make changes to these reports in the folder. And if I give her manage, she can view and edit, as well as control access to the folder for others. So the folder is how I control access to the reports and dashboards themselves. You should also know that report and dashboard folder access does not roll up through the hierarchy. So if I give it to a US sales rep, it does not roll up through the hierarchy. So instead, it might be helpful to do roles and subordinates to kind of let it trickle down through the hierarchy. So to clarify, this is how I give access to the reports and dashboards themselves. But what about the data on the reports? Dashboards, we'll talk about data with a running user, so we'll get there. But what about data on the reports? Your whole security and data access model, everything that we talked about in our first lesson today, all of that controls access to the data on the report itself. So if I have a user, Bob, and Bob runs a report that shows all opportunities, but Bob, under normal circumstances, or with his security and access, can only see his own opportunities, that is also what he will see on the report. So your whole security and data access, your profile, your permission sets, your roles, that still controls access to the data on the reports itself. The folders just control access to the reports. Now back to the questions to ask. So when I first started taking on admin duties at my old company, one of the first things I did was starting to create reports. And you may have had this experience as well. Something often that we can allow some business users to do, or some people who are just starting to take on admin duties. And a mistake that I made was not asking enough questions from the get-go. And then I might send them a report and they would say, well, what about this? Well, can we change this? But I actually wanted to see this. But that was on me. I didn't ask enough questions from the beginning. So if you get a report request and you talk through these questions, you have a better chance of getting the report right, or getting the report like the report requester imagines, getting it right the first time if you go through these questions. So first thing you want to ask about is the report type. And the report type is the object or objects you are reporting on. Accounts, contacts and accounts, opportunities with products, leads with activities. Those are report types. And this is important because once I select the report type, I can't change it. I would have to start over if that was the case. Then the scope of my report. Whose records do you want to see? For what time frame? Then your columns. So this says what columns do you want to see? But usually if I'm working with an end user, usually I'm going to ask, okay, what fields are you trying to report on? Because your users aren't necessarily thinking in terms of specific columns, but they might be thinking, oh, here's a field that I want to know more about. Here's a field that I want totaled, something like that. So columns, what fields do you want to see? Then your formatting. This is one of our key terms we saw. How do we want our data displayed? We'll see a slide on this in a bit. But tabular is just a simple list, tabular report. If we want it grouped by rows only, it's a summary format. By rows and columns, kind of in a grid, it's a matrix. Or in blocks of data, it is a joined format. So those are your report format options. Then if we do want groupings, maybe in a summary or matrix format report, what fields do we want to group by? Do I want to see opportunities by opportunity owner? Do I want to see accounts by industry? Do I want to see leads by lead source? And so on. What groupings do we want? For your summaries with your numerical fields, do you want to show subtotals? Do you want to show grand totals? Do you want to summarize? Do you want to average for those numerical fields as well? Then adding your filters really allows you to control the records that appear on your report. So adding filters allows you to drill down and focus on those records you really care about. And this last question asks about this visual aspect to the data. Do we want conditional highlighting? Do we want to add a visual with a chart? We talked about what are reports. So let's talk about report types. Again, for the exam, you want to be clear on report types and know how they're different from report formats. So report types, that's the object or objects you are reporting on. Opportunities with products, accounts, cases, things like that. Those are your different report types. Report types include the fields available, the filters available and the default filters, and my default columns, all controlled by my report type, the object or objects that I am reporting on. Now, custom report types. This is one of the terms we saw originally, and I need to get my tools out